our brain goes into this state where it's got this intense, what we call cholinergic activity going on. So that unleashes genes that promote plasticity. And therefore, we're doing a lot of associative processing. And so we start, the images we see are disparate, strange, but they're doing these connections between things we don't usually connect. And in that state, a lot of musicians, a lot of poets, a lot of mathematicians see solutions to problems they've been facing, literally see it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patrick Mcnamara, for being here. I've watched all of your videos, I've read almost all of your articles, and all of it is so fascinating, from REM sleep to how religious experiences affect our brain. But what I have learned about REM sleep and using our dreams to enhance our creativity or use them to add to our creativity makes me wonder if it is possible for two people like all of these great musicians, all of these great artists, Michelangelo, Picasso, all of these people, their level of creativity was something extraordinary. Do you think if people could tap into like this idea that is propagated, accessing the full potential of your brain, do you think if everyone could do that, we would create at the same level of like the way the geniuses did? Like, could we access that level of creativity?
I don't know, but I definitely know that accessing your dreams and or learning more about REM sleep biology, we can enhance our creativity in very significant ways. So it's a realm of neurobiology and cognitive science that is as yet untapped in terms of the creativity field, beyond the fact that we know that it's absolutely fundamental to creativity. Without REM sleep, it's unlikely you'd have any kind of creativity as we normally understand it anyway.
May I ask, how did you arrive at this point of research, like make this the focus of your research?
Sure. When I was in university, I was exposed to a course that covered REM sleep, as it was known then. This was like 30 years ago. And I must say that even though we've learned a ton about REM sleep since then, the fundamental mystery concerning REM sleep is still there. And what I learned at that time is that every 90 minutes during sleep, we go into this brain state that we call rapid eye movement sleep. And during that state, the eyes move around laterally and rapidly. That's where it gets its name, under the closed eyelids. But at the same time, our brain is intensely activated, more activated than it is during normal waking consciousness. So this is the time of the 24-hour day where our brains are doing the most work during this period of REM sleep.
Okay.
And nevertheless, even though our brains are extremely activated, our body is paralyzed. So we cannot move. So every 90 minutes, we can't move. And yet our brains are very intensely activated. But that's not all. REM sleep is also associated with these things we call autonomic nervous system storms. So our physiologies are in upheaval. So our physiologies are going wild. Our brain is intensely activated, but our bodies are paralyzed. But again, that's not all. The other thing that's going on is that our sexual systems are intensely activated. So males get erections for the entire duration of REM sleep. In females, the clitoris gets engorged, and there's something called pelvic thrusting for the entire duration of REM sleep. So you got this situation. Every 90 minutes, we go into this brain state, very highly activated, doing enormous amounts of computational information processing. And yet we're paralyzed. And yet we're sexually activated. And then to top it all off, we're forced to watch these things we call dreams. Now, why would Mother Nature produce such a brain state? You know, like what could possibly be the evolutionary function of something like that? If you're paralyzed, you're going to be eaten by predators. You know, so it makes no evolutionary sense. So this is a massive mystery in evolutionary biology, and that's what got me interested in it.
Okay, that's actually very fascinating. But I always wonder, knowing all of these things that REM sleep can help us add to our creativity, do you think is there any way for us to channel it in any effective way? Like we have heard about Tesla and Edison using their sleep to come up with ideas, but when you read those articles, it seems like they just had to close their eyes and they could right away tap into it. But for the rest of us, it is not that easy. So, what does that process look like? Is there a way for us to consciously channel that power?
Yeah, I think so. And we're finding out better and better ways to do it. The simplest way to do it is when we go to sleep, we go through basically 3 or 4 stages of sleep called N1, N2, N3, and then slow wave sleep. And during the first stage, we go through something called hypnagogia experiences. Our brain goes into the state where it's got this intense, what we call cholinergic activity going on. So that unleashes genes that promote plasticity. And therefore, we're doing a lot of associative processing. And so we start, the images we see are disparate, strange, but they're doing these connections between things we don't usually connect. And in that state, a lot of musicians, a lot of poets, a lot of mathematicians see solutions to problems they've been facing, literally see it. So what a lot of people have been doing is just setting the alarm clock so that when you go into stage N1, you wake up and you have all those images right before you. And then you can use those images to free associate to them and then enhance your creativity. Now there are some smartphone apps that can detect when you go into N1 and automatically wake you up, and you can tap that creative potential that way. REM sleep is a much more
Okay.
intense example of hypnagogic sleep. So if you really want to tap creativity, you want to get to REM. But N1 sleep is still also a very creative brain state that we can tap very easily. And most people don't do it.
Okay, so when you say tap very easily, what does that mean?
It means simply waking up after you've been in N1 sleep for a few minutes so that when you wake
Okay.
up, you immediately are suffused and immersed in all those images that were in your brain during N1 stage sleep. And since you
Okay.
can easily recall all those images, you can use them for the creative process.
I'm beginning to get the idea here. But do you think that would, if you're waking up every few periods, do you think that would affect the quality of sleep we are getting
Well,
and
that's yeah.
therefore our performance? That's a trade
Well,
off.
yeah, it's the trade-off. In the long run, I mean, you can't do it every night, but you can do it occasionally. And if you look into the
Okay.
biographies of many creative writers, they discovered this
Yeah.
spontaneously. They knew that as they started to fall asleep, they would be immersed
Yeah.
in this sea of images that was wild, like untamed,
Yes.
just a sea of images. And so they knew if they could recall those more carefully, they could get more creative ideas. And there's dozens of examples of writers doing that, for example, and painters. Like many of the surrealists
Yeah.
use that technique quite often.
This process seems very independent in itself. Like this is something anybody can access
Yeah.
regardless of your age, regardless of who you are. But do you think brain health, your overall brain health would impact it?
Well, again, like you were alluding to just a second ago, if you do it too much, if you do it every night, at
Yeah.
some point it's going to impact the quality of your sleep, and then you get diminishing returns over time. So yeah, you
Okay.
can't be tapping it all the time, but you can tap it on a semi regular basis once a week or something like that. And then you don't pay too high a price. It doesn't interfere with your sleep that much. So it's just a balancing act.
Okay. Okay. And I recently read something about napping, it increasing the size of your brain.
Hmm.
Is there any truth to it? Does that impact how much of like the potential that we can tap into where our brain is concerned?
I'm not sure napping per se increases the size of your brain. What probably that study that you saw showed was that it confers some protective effect on brain structure and function, so that people who engage in naps over time, when you compare their brain structure and function to people who do not, or who have sleep deprivation to some extent. The ones who nap do better. Their cognitive abilities are preserved longer than the ones who don't nap. I think those are the more reliable findings. But there is evidence that sleep, the hippocampus in particular, generates new cells during sleep. And also, sleep is also associated with clearance of all kinds of bad things from your system. So without sleep, all these bad chemicals and these dead cells and all kinds of other bad things won't get washed out. So you need sleep to wash out your central nervous system, basically, and reset it. So there are all these health benefits to sleep that, reinforce health and cognitive function.
Okay, I think that's good to know, because with the amount of performance that people are demanding of themselves, I think s- sleep has importance all its own. But anytime we are pushed for time, we take away from our sleep. So that's very helpful to know. I also know that like you've researched the way nightmares affect our brain, and we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about REM sleep, but I have to wonder, using REM sleep to channel our creativity. But in from personal experience, like I think this is something we all share, and if we've watched a horror movie, that's
Mm-hmm.
likely to affect what we see, like what we dream when we're asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are someone who is going through like an anxious period, or we have undergone some severe trauma, that is bound to affect, I would say that that would affect the kind of dreams we have. So
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, so how would that show up in a creative process? Can people with severe trauma, can people who have a lot of nightmares also use that for creative process to enhance performance, or would that, or is that a draining process for them?
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, you'd have to ask them, but I don't think you can use the images from nightmares. Well, on the other hand, look at Stephen King novels. He claims that
Right,
many of
right,
many of the ideas for his horror stories come from his nightmares. So there's an example of
right.
somebody using imagery from nightmares to generate, extraordinary fiction. So but in general, I think I wouldn't advise trying to use your nightmare imagery as a source of creativity unless it over time reduces the distress you feel from nightmares. In general, you want to get rid of
Yes.
nightmares. They don't do a lot of good, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen of my patients and people I've worked with nightmares. So, and there's many, I mean, people who have frequent nightmares tend to be creative people. We don't know why. I think
Okay.
they have, when they score on questionnaires that assess what are known as boundaries. That is the inhibitory power in your brain. They score in the range of having thin boundaries. So they don't have as much inhibitory power as people without nightmares. And so if they have trauma
Okay.
or difficult experiences, it's more difficult for them to regulate those experiences than people without nightmares. So they're more vulnerable to the distress associated with those scary images.
Okay, but then I have to wonder if, like, during coaching, we meet a lot of the clients. We invest like a significant period of time trying to get them to come out of that trap that they have themselves in, where they're overthinking, where they're just completely indulging the anxiety they feel from day to day, or they're almost reveling in the trauma that they've experienced. Like it's become
Mm.
so familiar to them that they don't quite know how to experience anything else. But that has to have an impact on your like it has an impact on your mental performance. I'm guessing it would impact your brain health also. Or do you think like we are wasting our brain resources, because you just correlated nightmares to enhanced creativity, to like people being more creative who have nightmares? So if while we are awake we are constantly anxious, overthinking, do you think that affects our brain resources, the way we utilize our brain's power?
I think people find themselves going through periods of intense suffering or anxiety or distress or pain, and they they're given a choice when they go through these very difficult periods, and they can either be destroyed by it or just completely disheartened and be victimized by it, or they can say, okay, I'm going through this, it sucks, to be blunt, and
Yeah.
now what can I do? And so then you take that energy, that pain, those scary images, the distress, and you try to
Yeah.
turn it to good. You try to turn it to something creative, or eventually try to work through each of those emotional memories and then let go of them one by one, and slowly, step by step, get through it and learn some wisdom from the experience. I mean, what other choice do we have? Everybody goes through difficult
Yeah.
times, so the task is to find a way through it in such a way as to enrich your life, your creativity, and those around you.
Right. Okay. In your videos around REM sleep and creativity, I found this question in the comment section that was very interesting to me. How does one trigger lucid dream states apart from keeping a dream log to spot patterns in? It's not something we've talked about yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are many, many methods for triggering lucid dream states. So, for your audience, lucid dream states are when you are aware that you're dreaming. And for some people,
Right.
you can use that to enhance your creativity in all kinds of ways. Like, for example, if a person has been dealing with nightmare images, they can go into a lucid state and then literally confront the monster and say, why are you chasing me all the time? Go away, kind of thing. And often it works. So
Right.
there are good reasons to try to cultivate lucid dreams for some people. So there are many ways to do it. The most reliable way, after decades of research, is the most simplest way, and that is to practice during the daytime for a couple of weeks. Just ask your question: am I awake or am I dreaming? So that it
Okay.
becomes such a habituated question, that every day you've been doing this several times a day for a couple of weeks. Then you find yourself doing it in your dreams. And then asking that question in one of your dreams starts to wake you up during the dream. And then you suddenly
Okay.
realize, I'm in a dream, and then you're lucid.
Right.
That's the most effective way. There are other techniques that are being developed, but that's the most effective way.
So lucid dream states would be different from REM sleep, right?
Yeah. Most lucid dream states take place during REM sleep, though.
Okay, okay. Lucid dream states, that sounds kind of like the plot of the movie Inception. Like you are.
Yeah,
So
that
is
was all
this.
about lucid dream
So,
states and having dreams
yes,
within
yes.
dreams. Yeah.
Okay, that's very fascinating. So we hear all of these ideas about reprogramming your subconscious, about during your sleep planting these ideas in your head that would then change the way you experience reality. Is that something that can be done during REM sleep or during lucid dreams? What is the key to all of that? Because the ideas that are populating Instagram or all of these blogs, they seem very like they're too simplified. At least that's how it seems, considering what they're proposing that can be done. So what would you say, like how would you describe that process, reprogramming your subconscious? Is that something that we can really do?
I don't know about reprogramming the subconscious, but experimental dream researchers definitely can implant content into your dreams. There's no question about it. And it's for good
Right.
and for ill, because the technique has become so reliable that I signed and dozens of other dream researchers signed a letter to the scientific community saying this needs to be looked at and opposed because a lot of companies are going to start using these techniques to implant the desire to buy their products. So
Yeah.
we don't want dream science to be used for these kinds of nefarious purposes. But my point is that dream science has progressed to such an extent that yes, we now know that we can implant content, ideas, beliefs, images into dreams and for them to persist in dreams and possibly subsequently affect behavior. So that's a problem. It's
Okay.
also an opportunity, but it's a problem too.
Yeah. Okay, so there is something to this idea that we need to be very mindful of the thoughts that we take to our bed or the thoughts that dominate us while we are awake, because they are likely to also affect us while we are sleeping. And as you said, like during REM sleep, your brain, the plasticity goes up,
Yep.
which means the brain would be more absorbent of those ideas.
Well put. Yep. I think that's correct. Yeah. REM sleep seems to
Okay.
be the brain's preferred method of dealing with highly significant events or intense emotional memories. So, whenever we have something emotionally significant happen in our lives, it gets processed, whether we like it or not, in REM sleep. And so, our
Okay.
REM sleep and dreams are constantly dealing with taking emotional memories and shaping them in such a way that they get processed into long term memory, thereby influencing our subsequent behavior. There's no other way to learn from past behaviors except by processing
Right.
these emotional memories, and REM sleep seems to be the preferred system to process emotional memories of high significance.
Okay, now I have a bunch of questions, and I know that would also lend credibility to this idea that if you can keep your environment clean, if you clean in the sense that like better thoughts, purer thoughts, or just have experiences that are more positive in their nature, then that would, I'm guessing that would also show up in the creativity that you can channel through REM sleep.
Well, to the extent that those are emotionally significant events, probably, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there have been
Okay.
even neutral events show up in our dreams. And it tends to take about a 5 day period for them to show up in our dream content. So, over that 5 day period,
Oh,
the
okay.
brain is taking pieces of some event in your life, breaking it down into digestible pieces, and then working on them in such a way to provide certain context to them, and then storing them into long term memory systems. And then they pop up in our dreams. And we have a dream, and we say, okay, there's this image in the dream, that image. Huh, image number 3, I remember that from
Okay.
5 days ago. But all the other images seem
Okay.
random, but one or two we can trace back to 5 days previously. So we know that this processing is occurring in our brains and in our dreams.
Okay.
And it takes
So
5 7 days.
5 to 7 days. That's actually interesting because if you're working on like a large project, you can mull over certain ideas, and then maybe during REM sleep, you can start connecting them over a period of time and channel your REM sleep to actually create something better than you would have created had you done it during your waking hours completely.
Possibly, yeah. I don't know of any studies that have done that, but yeah, I don't see why not. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe my audience can do it. Maybe I can do it
Yeah, why
because that
not?
sounds interesting. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so there is something that I've experienced in my life. So ever since I was a kid, I was a very lonely kid. I used to hear voices. Like whenever I would be extremely distressed, there would be a voice in my head. I never talked about it. When I grew up, I experienced extreme depression, and I found this support group of people. During depression, the voices got louder and they got way violent. They were never violent or ugly before. But in this group, I met people who have voices in their head, and they have like 20, 30 voices. Some people have voices that warn them against imminent disasters, that help them save lives, which
Hmm.
is crazy. But if you are hearing these voices when you're asleep, for me at least, they would become also very visual. They would,
Hmm.
it would almost be like they have more power. So during depression, because they were so negative, I would avoid sleeping because
Sure.
they were very, very extreme experiences. And I've never had the opportunity to ask someone who has the kind of knowledge that you do, what is that about? Like, do you think that has something? of course that has to do something with the emotional experiences,
Yep.
because right now I'm healthy. I'm no longer hearing those voices. I'm all good.
Good.
But those other people, they hear them constantly.
Mm.
And for some of them, it's not, they say that it has nothing to do with our regular life. They're warning us against disasters, like we're hearing God helping us out, something like that.
Mm.
so
Hmm. Hmm.
so any idea what that's what that's about?
Well, there are many answers to that question. Um,
Right.
from the point of view of a spiritual person, not from a scientist. I mean, a scientist can be very spiritual, of course, but from a
Yes.
non-materialist point of view, from a standard spiritual perspective, I see no reason not to take seriously the prospect that God or quote unquote angelic entities um, or other supernatural agents might be real and might be providing this individual with real actionable information. On the other hand, there one should proceed with extreme caution when um, you are hearing voices, like extreme caution, because even if these entities are real, some very often they're like the ones you had. They're saying bad things, and you
Yeah.
don't want to listen to them. So that's the first part of the answer. Let's assume that the entities have some
Okay.
reality. Then you need to use discernment and not listen to the bad voices and listen to the good voices, and always be in touch with a spiritual director or a counselor or a doctor, etc. Now,
Yes.
from a scientific point of view, nobody knows what's going on when people are hearing voices, but there are lots of theories. One theory that links it and roots it in REM sleep is that REM sleep, as I described to you, is this highly associative state, this highly creative state,
Yes.
and sometimes it gets what we call disinhibited, so that it starts to intrude into waking consciousness. And you see that in disorders like narcolepsy, where the physiology of REM sleep
Right.
enters waking consciousness, and they literally fall asleep right before your eyes. But before they do so, they hallucinate because they're literally dreaming during the daytime, and they hallucinate all these supernatural agents, and they're hearing all kinds of voices, the characters talking in the dreams. So, one explanation about what's going on when you're hearing voices is you've got REM sleep intruding into waking consciousness, and you're literally living out these dreams that happen to you spontaneously with all kinds of characters coming from all kinds of memories and all kinds of
Right.
innovative, creative scenarios. So, what to do? So, let's say REM sleep is contributing to good and bad dissociative states and voices.
Right.
Then what do you do? Well, there are medications that can help regulate REM sleep states and put it back to where it's supposed to be, during sleep, so that it doesn't intrude into waking consciousness. And there are cognitive behavioral techniques that help with that as well. So, there are medications that people with narcolepsy take that do that. There are medications people with frequent nightmares take that can do that, can re-regulate REM sleep. So there are lots of different ways to handle these dissociative states. And a person doesn't have to live with them if they don't want to.
That's very, that's interesting. But I do wonder the people who have a lot of such experience, like for them, for some of these the members of this group, it's almost constant. It's
Mhm.
never not a part of their life. I wonder if that affects your brain. Like, does it change your brain in any way, or does it change the way you experience reality?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think if you ask most of these individuals, and I've worked with quite a few of them, they say one thing that's particularly distressing to them is they sometimes don't know what's real and unreal. They're constantly
Yeah, of
having to check
course.
what's real, what's unreal. That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then, as you pointed out, a lot of the times the voices they're persecuting the individual. They're saying, you're no good. You're
Yeah.
awful. You're terrible. Blah, blah, blah. They're attacking the poor individual, and who needs
Yeah.
that? Like,
Yeah.
obviously that
Of
kind of
course.
experience is going to wear somebody down, but the good
Yes.
news is that there are, for example, a lot of the antipsychotic medications affect what are known as 5-HT2A signaling receptor signaling systems. These are serotonergic signaling systems that also regulate REM sleep. So these antipsychotic agents do what we were just talking about. They re-regulate REM, and then all these delusional states start to subside. And then many of the antidepressants work by suppressing REM sleep. So they
Oh,
work too.
okay.
So one doesn't
Okay.
have to live with those voices.
Right. There is a cost to taking antipsychotic drugs.
Oh,
I
yeah.
found
Oh, yeah.
most comfort in, yeah, because a lot of these people, when they first went to the psychologist or a psychiatrist, they were diagnosed with
Yeah.
schizophrenia or some a disorder like that. When they are actually contributing members of society, they have
Sure.
normal functioning, except for when they have these incidents. Except for that, they are completely okay. They're healthy people, but they were diagnosed with all of these terrible mental disorders, and they were given antipsychotic drugs, and that
They're
completely
heavy drugs.
disrupted their normal
They're
performance.
heavy
They're very
drugs.
heavy
Yeah.
drugs.
And
Yeah.
yeah, um, hopefully we'll find drugs with less side effects soon. But yeah,
Yeah.
you only want to use them when you got few other choices. You know.
Yeah. The other thing that I have learned through personal experience that has helped me, I'm a very religious person. I've always been very
Hmm.
religious. For me now, I've reached a point, thanks to the depression that I went through, where I have found a lot of ways to surrender to my spirituality and let that dominate and take care of me. So I have to ask you, because I know that is something that your research focuses on, how religious experiences change our brain, because it's something I feel like there's a lot of power to it. So I definitely want to talk about it.
Hmm.
We talked about REM sleep and how it impacts our creativity.
Hmm.
How would religious experiences, like actively making that a part of your life, affect the sort of experiences you have while you are asleep? How would that affect your creativity? How does it change your brain?
Good question. First, let me say that obviously this applies only to people who have come to the conclusions that you have come to, namely that the religious consciousness refers to something real and life enhancing. It's not mere delusion or lies or any of that stuff. There may be some BS in religion, but for the most part, there's gold there and it's worth pursuing. So everything I'm going to say, I'm speaking about that kind of religion where the person finds something life enhancing in it. Now, what does it do
Right.
to the brain? For those individuals who hold those beliefs as true and then start to live by them, it does many things. It adds quite a bit of cognitive protection for you. So, for example, there are very strong positive associations between degree of religiosity up to a certain point and
Right.
protection against risky behaviors like taking drugs, doing alcohol, sex at an early age, or unprotected sex, or it uh, adopting a religious consciousness and practices tends to protect you against those kinds of risky behaviors, and it probably does that
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons. In addition, it through its rituals, it tends to support the processes in REM sleep that generate new cellular structures and plasticity, so that it enhances that kind of ability to transform your sense of self into something that you consider an ideal self. We're always trying to
Right.
build an ideal self, a self that has
Right.
power, creativity, life
Yes.
enhancing, able to enrich other people's lives as well. We want to reach that ideal self. And religion, when it's working properly, has a whole suite of tools to help you get to that ideal self. Everything from rituals to ascetical practices to social get togethers to reading sacred texts and going into the archives of thousands of years of experience from people from all over the world saying, look, I suffered and I went through all this. And when I interact with
Right.
supernatural agents, I learn this wisdom. See if it works for you, you know? And so there's a
Right.
ton of gold and treasure in all those religious traditions. So, for all those reasons, religion, as we understand it today, helps to shape the brain in such a way that it facilitates your working towards that ideal self.
That's very helpful. But there was this one idea that was explored in one of your videos that was very fascinating to me, that how we approach religion, in the sense that some of us lose our sense of agency because
Mm-hmm,
we adopt a completely subservient position, versus if we use them to add to our power. And
mm-hmm,
because for me, I would say the dominant idea for me is that God's looking out for me. So
mm-hmm,
let me go ahead and take these risks and be show up in this very confident, very bold way,
mm-hmm,
and he'll help me, or she'll help me, whatever you
mm-hmm,
choose
mm-hmm.
to believe in. Do you really think that that would, how you approach religion, would have such a deep impact on your brain that it would alter your personality, the experiences you have while you're asleep, the experience, the way you experience reality, and then completely change how you're showing up in the world?
I think if you take it seriously, yeah. And I'm not sure what video you're referring to, but it sounds like what I was trying to say when I said that um, many of the religions ask us to, when interpreted a certain way,
Yes.
ask us to be
Yes.
subservient towards
Yes.
a supernatural agent. And I don't think that's a good idea. But the God in the Abrahamic traditions wants full, free, powerful, creative, adult, rational agents, not mere servants. In fact, in the Christian scriptures, Jesus says, I call you friends, not servants. And I know that there are similar in other sacred texts and other religious traditions. You get the same message,
Yes.
So I think there's been traditions in all the world religions to ask us to shut up and just do whatever the gods tell us to do. But I
Yeah.
think there's another set of traditions in all the world's religious traditions that say, well, no, the gods want us to get up off our knees and start to collaborate with them to create life enhancing ecologies and environments and social situations for human beings, um, now, yes, we've got to, if we take religion seriously and the gods as real, we should reverence them. But that doesn't mean we have to shut
Right.
our minds down, and just be quote
Yes.
unquote servants. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth. That's just from my experience. And but
Yeah.
whoever's listening, look to your traditions, not to me. I'm no expert on how to interact with the gods. I'm not. Look to your traditions and what resonates with you and what seems right to you.
I think that's what you've shared is very, very helpful. I think people who give up that power, where they're like, I am a servant to my fate, have a very, they're not as proactive, they're not as involved in creating their own reality, because they have almost given up
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
their the weapons that they do have. So no, what you've shared is incredibly helpful. But I have to ask, and you can always choose not to answer
mm-hmm.
this, and that would be perfectly okay. But all of the knowledge that you've shared with me, the spiritual inclination of yours, and your the REM sleep stuff, the dream, all the power that it offers us, how you've channeled it into your life, I would love to know that.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I've done such a good job of it. I mean, I struggle with it every day, and I try to be as good a scientist as I can and contribute to scientific knowledge, and I think I've done that. And
Yes.
that's sometimes, it's all we can ask of a person. It's like, okay, contribute as much as you can to the world's base of knowledge, and hopefully that
Yeah.
knowledge will enrich other people's lives. Um, and I use whatever I learn in my own life to have compassion for myself and for all those around me. When all is said and done, that's what helps us get through the difficulties and challenges of life, it seems to me. And that sounds very simple minded, but
No.
I tend to forget that. So I need to remind myself of that every day. And I think the science
Yeah.
is consistent with that kind of attitude. Like
Yes.
life is hard. So take it day by day, use your rationality to understand it and get to the of the matter, get to ultimate
Yeah.
reality. Life is a chance to reach that ultimate reality. So go for it, you know? Use your brain, your mind, your spirit, your heart. Go for the ultimate reality, you know? And then share it.
I love that. I really love that. And I think that comes across in the way you share the knowledge that you have.
I think that's the scientific attitude.
But I have to ask you, because I am almost on a regular basis spooked by the variety of experiences my brain creates for me. And considering this is what you do, this is your main job in life, like you're constantly going deeper and deeper into brain's capabilities. Are you ever spooked by it? Like, are you ever very left feeling very abandoned that there is so much you'll never know and you've no idea like how much remains under the layers, and what you've already known is so massive? Are you ever spooked by it? This is a silly question, but I am
No,
curious
no,
about it.
it's a great question. I mean, and it's going to sound a bit trite, but it's absolutely true. I think in any science, and I think indeed in any spiritual pursuit, if you don't become more and more humble over time, then you're not really realizing how deeply you're penetrating the mystery. Because the deeper you go into a mystery, the more you find out how little you really know and how much
Yeah.
there is to know. And that forces on you, to me, the scientific attitude. Like deep curiosity, awe, and wonder, but a very sort of humble attitude. Like, wow, this is big. I may never penetrate to but I'm going to go
Yeah.
for it. And learn as much as I possibly can, because there's nothing more exciting than the truth. So um,
Yeah.
I think the more I know, the more I realize how little I know.
Yeah. Like Socrates.
Well, exactly.
That's the
He's
yeah.
perfect example. He was the
Perfect
smartest guy
example.
because he realized he knew very little.
Yeah. Okay, how can we dream more effectively? How do we improve our REM sleep?
Sleep hygiene, basic sleep hygiene practices. So
Okay. Okay.
um, very common sense things. Don't drink a lot of coffee. Don't do a lot of alcohol and drugs. Go to bed at a
Okay.
regular time. Don't bring your smartphone into bed with you. Um, Exercise daily. Standard sleep hygiene, and you'll get very good REM sleep.
That's helpful. That's easy to follow also. Now, I have to ask about the hallucinogenic
Hmm.
experiences, psychedelics. That keeps coming up more and more now. People are very interested in finding out more, but there's also, understandably, a lot of fear around it. Like, what utility does it offer, if any, and how do we like for some? I've never done psychedelics. where do we start if we want to go down this path?
Well, there's, as you probably know, been a revolution in scientific knowledge of what psychedelics do, at least the serotonergic psychedelics, what they do to the brain and stuff like that. And there's been clinical trials on them, double-blinded, placebo-controlled experiments done to see if they improve things like depression or all kinds of distress states and the addiction. So the results tend to indicate that there is improvement in mood with one session with a psychedelic. So they look promising, at least the so-called serotonergic psychedelics. Not so, ketamine and still there's still a lot of controversy about that, but things like psilocybin and LSD, there's pretty good, reliable data that it, with one session, under the controlled set and setting conditions of a clinic or laboratory, helps with mood when a person is previously depressed. So whether
Okay.
serotonergics will help with all kinds of other disorders, that's all under active investigation now. Um, for a person who wants to look into psychedelics, I recommend that
Mm-hmm.
that you don't do it alone. You do it in a ritual setting with people you trust, and preferably with one of these clinics, trained professionals. And don't do high doses, obviously.
Right.
Um, although
Right.
you probably won't die from a high dose, but if you have a vulnerable psyche to start with, and you do a high dose
Yeah.
psychedelic, it's asking for trouble. So
Yeah.
proceed with caution. But I'm hopeful that psychedelics are going to be another tool we can use to help people with mood disorders in particular.
I have no knowledge around it, so can you please let me know the drugs that you mentioned, the psychedelic drugs that you mentioned, are those like similar to mushrooms? Because
Yeah,
what I understand, mushroom is like the starting point, which is the easiest to
yeah.
access.
Psilocybin
Okay.
basically comes from mushroom. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then there's of course ayahuasca, which is this drink that was discovered and developed in South America, but is being used quite a bit by westernized peoples now. But the mechanisms are basically the
Yeah.
same. They all work on these 5-HT2A signaling systems that I mentioned earlier. Um, so they
Okay.
increase brain plasticity, for example. However, they do it in one big fell swoop, and it happens to you all. I mean, DMT happens in about 20 minutes, ayahuasca over several
Okay.
hours, and
Okay.
psilocybin and LSD over several hours. But in any case, it's a very intense experience, and so it shouldn't be undertaken um, without serious spiritual intent, in my opinion. Of course, people do it all the time with no ill effects, just for fun. But in my
Right.
opinion, they're powerful agents, and
Yeah.
particularly with people with vulnerable psyches, you should not. It's playing with fire.
Okay, that's good to know because we do hear a lot of when we talk to these people who have these very focused groups of intellectual people, highly intellectual people who innovate almost constantly. They often talk about using psychedelics to
Mhm.
enhance their genius, so to say, and they do it in a very casual way, like taking
Yeah.
supplements. It's so much a part of their lifestyle.
Hmm.
Is there any, does that seem like a viable option, making it so much a part of your life that you are using it whenever you are in a highly, when you're in that period of your
Hmm.
work where you are innovating almost constantly?
I don't think there's any good experimental evidence that microdosing with these agents
Right.
enhances creativity over time. However, the people who are doing it they claim it really does. But I have not seen any controlled studies to prove that. So
Okay.
I would be skeptical myself.
Okay. I found this article that was sharing it was anecdotal evidence. A few people shared that they could see more colors when they were under the influence of psychedelics.
Oh, yeah.
And apparently, human beings can only see three colors and there are so many more colors in the universe. So that was very fascinating to me. So apparently it can also impact your senses and what you can, well, like delimit your perception in a way.
Well, there's no question that psychedelics at higher doses, not microdosing, but psychedelics at higher doses absolutely have these profound effects on the senses. Absolutely no question. And on the brain, major, massive effects. And to me, um, particularly when you, what we call demodulate the default mode network, then your brain is reset into this whole other state, and you have access to these just extraordinary realms. So yeah, psychedelics have those incredible effects, and we should experimentally explore them. But I think what's going on with microdosing is, to get back to REM sleep, is that it disinhibits REM sleep. So you microdose, you get small doses of these agents, and that releases REM sleep, so it starts to intrude during daytime. And so they have these periods of dreamy states, colorful states with lots of images. And yeah, to me, that's just REM intruding into daytime consciousness. And that's not
Okay, okay.
necessarily a good thing, over time.
What that makes me wonder, like what we talked about, lucid dreaming.
Mhm.
Is there a way to connect the psychedelic experience to because lucid dreaming, the way you described it, in itself sounds such a powerful. If you can channel it, it sounds such a powerful thing that could completely alter your life and personality. And then to use psychedelics in any way would heighten that, would further amplify that. Is that possible to do?
There, there's initial evidence that uh, people who use psychedelics regularly tend to have more lucid dreams. But to me, what that suggests is that,
Right.
you're taking these tools and you're saying, let's disinhibit REM sleep, on a major basis, day after day after day after day, and eventually
Right.
you start to have lucid dreams, and now REM sleep is invading um, all your brain states, not just waking consciousness, but it's starting to invade slow wave sleep and all the other sleep stages. And and for a while, that means you're enormously creative and you're having all these insights and everything's amazing. But after a while, um, you pay very high price. You start to lose quality sleep. Everything that slow wave sleep was supposed to be doing, it can't be doing because REM sleep is invading it. So there's all these other physiological functions that are being neglected because you've unleashed REM by microdosing or by taking um, lots of psychedelics and going into lucid dreams too often. So everything requires balance. This is a wide open
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
frontier, and there's experimental controlled studies going on all aspects of this, and we simply don't know enough yet to say anything
Yeah.
definitive. But I'm really glad we're investigating psychedelics. I think it's going to teach us major things about creativity, about spirituality, about mood disorders, about the brain.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a revolution in all of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, we have to approach it cautiously, as you
But
said.
please proceed with caution.
Yeah. There was this very fascinating discussion going on Reddit, as unreliable as Reddit can be. But there was something that someone mentioned about, again, they were hearing voices, having hallucinations, and they had it during depression. And then it would show up every once in a while in their life whenever they would go without sleep for too long. And then
Yeah.
someone mentioned that now your brain is simply more susceptible to these experiences because there was an intense period of this
Hmm.
experience. And to me, that made sense, even though I don't know if that person had any kind of like knowledge around this area or not, but that made sense, that if your brain has been able to access these states for you, even if it was causing distress, your brain would be more susceptible whenever under any kind of emotional trauma or any kind of stress. Does that make any sense? Or
I think it
I don't
does.
know if I'm scaring
No,
myself.
no, I think it does. But I would hasten to add, though, that that person is not duck, so to speak, and always being open to hearing voices all the time, just because they've accustomed their brain to being open to
Yeah.
those kinds of influences. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
that's going to be that way for the rest of their lives. If they want
Okay.
that to go away,
Good
there's
to know.
ways to make that to go away.
Okay. And would that translate to psychedelics also? Like if you've done psychedelics in the way that you recommend that people do it, would the effects linger?
The studies show that some of the beneficial effects, like when people go into mystical states, some of the beneficial effects of that last for at least 6 months afterwards.
Right.
And
Okay.
there have been controlled studies of people, like that trip you did 20 years ago. Are you still having any experiences from that? And people will say yes. Like there's a very famous experiment called the Marsh Chapel experiment that was done in the 1960s, where people were given psilocybin during a Christian service at Boston University's Marsh Chapel, and they had very intense psychedelic experiences during the service. And I think maybe there was like 10, 15 people involved in it. And those 10 or 15 people were tracked down like 20 or 30 years later and interviewed about that experience. And every single one of them
Right.
said, yeah, I'm still still deriving insight from it, still integrating it 30 years later. So they're
Wow.
powerful experiences.
Yeah. Another note of caution there.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Okay. So there is this one question that I have to ask you in this age of AI with all of these things happening, putting together robots that can do all kinds of things. If you had the power to create like a whole new being that would in some ways be superior to humans, that would definitely be superior to humans if you were mindfully putting it together, what would be the features that that species would have to make it fully effective? If we could take anything across species, like anything from any being.
Well, you'd have to. I would personally want to program into its DNA, so to speak, to do no harm to human beings
Ah,
as a
yes.
a absolute first principle. And and
Right.
and then I think I would um, design it or program it so that it could write its own programs and escalate its intelligence algorithms so that it can engage in what we call cumulative learning, so that it learns a body of knowledge up to level X. But then when it starts the next cycle of learning, it doesn't go back to zero, it goes back to X, and then it builds on it,
Right.
and it builds and builds and
Yeah.
builds and builds, so that you have cumulative learning, and that way you get super intelligence pretty quickly. Um, and as long as that the primary directive, so to speak, do no harm to humans, is
Yeah.
guiding it all, then what you would have at the service of human beings is this um, set of intelligences that so far advanced about what we can do on a global scale
Hmm.
that it would
Yeah.
really revolutionize, I mean, everything about our lives, get us to other planets. I
Right.
mean, it's just unbelievable what a super intelligence can do.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. And with the principle of do no harm dominating its actions, that would be
But there's the
very
rub.
helpful.
Nobody's figured out how to do that. So this
Yeah.
is just, like idle.
So we are
Yeah.
realizing. Yeah. Okay. My last super juvenile question. I don't know if this is something you've already experienced or not, but with everything we've discussed today, if you were to ever encounter, because people always talk about going to haunted houses, going to all these spooky places that people warn you against, if you were to ever meet something that you cannot rationally explain away, like it's standing right there, it seems to be a spirit, ghost, what would your first reaction be in an event like that? And what if you also do psychedelics and then you just don't know what's up?
People who have done psychedelic experience that every day. At least that's what they report. If I experienced that, I would treat the entity with extreme caution and respect. And respect in the sense that it's like if you came across a very poisonous wild snake in the woods and you could barely see
Right.
it, you'd proceed with extreme caution. It's something that could really harm you if you made the wrong move or something.
Yeah.
So that's how. The thing you presented me with, okay, there's this supernatural agent and it seems to be demonic in some way, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
I experience that, I wouldn't say, it's just an illusion, a delusion. I can just laugh
Right.
at it. No, I would treat it with caution
Yeah.
and avoid it at all
I think,
costs.
yeah, that makes sense. We have these places in India, especially. India is filled with places like that are very mystical, and people are always planning to go there. And I'm like, why would you do that? You don't know what you're gonna find in there. But it's fascinating. I think if I were in a situation like that, I would conveniently pass on.
I often ask myself, like, why do a lot of people expose themselves to horror movies? They
Yeah,
go to a horror movie and there's these horrifying images. Those images get into your mind, brain, and then you got to deal with them.
yeah,
And yet, some people find it appealing. To me, it's inviting.
yes,
I'd rather not invite those kinds of horrifying images into my mind. If I have a choice about it.
yeah.
So
Yeah, this was so amazing, Dr. McNamara. Thank you so very, very much for taking the time out to do this. It was amazing.
thank you for inviting me, Krati.
So we have reached the end of this episode. Thank you so much for watching the video and for sharing your time with me. The links to all the resources mentioned during the conversation will be given in the video description. And if you would rather listen to these conversations, you can find Experable Podcast on most podcast platforms. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, here's another conversation that you will love. I hope you enjoy it. Now, I'll be back again very soon with another video. Till then, take care of yourself. Bye.